faculty at the University of Oregon. And I'm so excited to be with you today. I served as an advisor consultant to put together today's program in order that we might bring together some amazing speakers for you who are going to be talking about the amazing work they're doing out in the field, in their repositories, in their tribal communities on these important topics. And the goal of today is not only to share the amazing work that they're doing, but also to bring us in conversation together with one another about those projects, about that work that's happening, and how we can continue to have those conversations and discussions about these important topics so that as you go all back into your repositories, if you're working with Indigenous materials, or if you're hoping to work with these materials, that you'll have the right tools and ideas and information from those also working with these materials, or those in their own tribal communities that are hoping to see their materials cared for and stewarded in the correct way. So we hope that what we share with you today will be useful for you, and we also again hope it will be a conversation where we can ask questions, we can be in discussion with each other about these important topics. So also we just want to remind you that we're live streaming this discussion and these presentations, so for those that can't be here, that they can tune in. So we'll be using the mic for our presentations so that way people can hear us appropriately, and when we have questions, we'll be repeating those back so people who are on the live stream can also hear those. So we welcome you all, we welcome those who are joining us via the live stream, and hope that this will be a wonderful day for you all, and that you'll join us for all of our amazing sessions. So to start off, myself and Michael Pahn, who is also here, which will introduce himself, are going to be presenting our first session. And the title of our first session is From Time Immemorial, Centering Indigenous Knowledge in Archival Practice. And together, we're going to be highlighting a variety of different, more overarching and theoretical topics that have helped us in our own work, where we work together on a variety of different programs and activities. However, before I begin, I just want to do an territorial acknowledgement of the Indigenous people of whose land we are meeting on today. So today, the traditional owners of this land that we meet today are the Piscataway people of this land, and there are 3 different tribal communities and bands that come from this area. So there's the Cedarville Band of Piscataway, and then there's also their Indian Nation as well as the Kainai tribe. So there's 3 different communities that we acknowledge, and we recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture of this area, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And we just acknowledge that it's so important to not only acknowledge that the land that we're meeting on, but also acknowledge all the major contributions and ways that they have contributed to this area, but also the displacement of their people as well. I also want to take this time to thank AMIA and your organizers for the time and dedication to have this topic be discussed at this conference, and to have a whole day focused on this topic is really amazing. So I just want to thank so much the organizers, and especially for Melissa Dolman, who has really coordinated a lot of this effort. I also want to honor and acknowledge also other Indigenous colleagues and tribal community partners who have traveled far to be here and left their communities to be with us today. We thank you so much for being here and sharing with us your expertise and the work that you're doing in your own communities. It's so important to have these conversations together, and we're so glad to have you here with us today. So I also want to give a brief introduction of where I'm from and center a little bit of the territory where I come from, so you know a little bit more about me. So I come from the state of Oregon, which previously shows on this map all the variety of different Indigenous communities that existed and still exist today before the state was even established. And I specifically come from the community of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and the state of Oregon has 9 federally recognized tribes, as well as many more unrecognized tribes. And the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde is made up of a variety of different communities were brought to that region and during forced removal, and I am specifically Chinook, Cree, and Cow Creek, and I just also want to honor a lot of the amazing Indigenous women in my life who have made it possible for me to be here today, as well as who I honor in my work for many of the different challenges and things that they had to go through growing up in a time that didn't always honor Indigenous people. And so I honor them for supporting me and helping me to be here with you today. Much of what I'm going to be sharing with you today comes from a recent presentation that I was able to be a part of recently in Australia with the Indigenous Archive Collective and at the Jamana Institute. And I just want to honor and also recognize the amazing Indigenous scholars, archivists that have brought me into this collective, as well as the work that they are doing to honor and recognize Indigenous archives, not just in Australia, but throughout the world. And this specific symposium is called The Right to Reply, Indigenous Rights in Data and Collections. And as part of this, really started to talk about conversations about how important it is for Indigenous communities to be able to be in conversation with and respond to and know where their collections are at state, federal repositories, as well as a variety of other locations. So this really builds upon that conversation, but centers it here within the United States and talks about how important that is. So just to give you a little bit more context, of what we're going to be talking about today collectively, is that before I came to the University of Oregon about 7 years ago, and which I served as the university historian and archivist. Prior to that, Michael and I worked together from 2008 to 2012. I served previously as the head of the National Museum of the American Indians Archive Center. And so Michael and I worked together there at that time. And when I departed, he took over my position. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about today and highlighting is both from that time period that we worked together, as well as continuing projects that he has continued to work on. And they're both going to cover some projects in regards to film, but also some that are not related to film, because we're focusing more on what it takes and what is required and what's so important when working with tribal communities, and how to build respectful relationships. And sometimes that is around film or media collections, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's around other types of collections. And so our goal here today is to provide some specific examples of what those projects look like, but more importantly, what are the ethics behind that? What does it look like to build those types of relationships? And what are some more practical ideas and examples that we can share with you that will help you to really delve into those projects, and then give you some specific examples of how that work actually happens, which is what I'm sure most of you are here to find out more about. And then as we go throughout the day, we'll have a lot more specific examples of those projects and lessons learned. And so our presentation to start off with is meant to be more of this kind of general overview, providing lots of context for you. We're also going to provide some historical context of why do we do this work, why is this important, why are Indigenous collections different, and how has that shown up for us in our work, and how have we worked with communities. Both Michael and I have also worked through the Society of American Archivists, the National or the Native American Archives Roundtable, which is now a section, and so we're going to be sharing some of that work as well. We both served previously as the chairs of that section, so we'll share with a lot of the work that we did there as well. So to start off with, I just want to start with this concept that has really centered a lot of my own work that I have learned from this amazing woman, Patricia Cochran, who she is previously the executive director of the Alaska Native Science Commission. And in 2014 at the University of Oregon, she was one of our keynote speakers for the Climate Change and Indigenous Peoples Conference. and she had this amazing statement saying, "We don't care what you know until we know that you care." And she was talking about in the context of so many either scholars coming into her community or researchers or even curators wanting to work with their materials. And in order to make that a successful process and an effective way in working with their community, she wants to know that you care and that when you come to work with her community or with her materials, that she would know that you are actually coming at it in a good way and in a respectful way. And that's really centered a lot of the work that I do, that I know a lot of us do, that we are coming at it not just as this is our job, this is why, whether it's being a curator, archivist, researcher, whatever your title might be, that might be the work that you're trying to do, but at the core of it should be that you are trying to do better, that they're showing the communities that you're working with that you do care about what they're trying to do in their communities, that you care about this work, and that you're coming at it not with your own agenda, but listening and hearing what the community needs. So this has really shaped a lot of the work that I do, as well as the work I know Michael does, and that we hope that it will shape the work that you do as well. And this theme will carry throughout our presentation today in really showing how we try to show that we care and how we try to give back. And it's really flipping the narrative in, I think, the way traditionally Western ways of approaching this work in archives or in curatorial work is focused too much on maybe the repositories' needs and wants, but we need to flip that to what the tribal community needs are and what they really need in their communities. So we also want to highlight that a lot of what we'll be talking about today is really building upon a huge amount of scholarly work and activist work and practitioner work around decolonizing archives and research and scholarship. And we just want to honor and recognize these amazing scholars who have paved the way for a lot of this work that is finally being implemented in our profession and that should be at the center of this work. So it's scholars like Linda Tahaway-Smith, Amy Lonetree, who writes about decolonizing museums, and then a scholar that I use in a lot of my work is Eva Marie Garot, who wrote this amazing book called Real Indians, Identity and Survival of Native America. And the reason why I highlight these amazing scholars is because we often get questions of how do we start this work, how do we do this work, and one of the most important things you can do is not only listening to tribal community members, but also listening to the amazing work that's coming out of their communities and out of their scholarship. They're the ones writing about this and telling you how to do this work and how you should approach it. And so we just really honor and give respects to that amazing work that's being done. And later throughout this presentation, I have other scholars and other practitioners who are doing amazing work that I will also cite. So we just hope that you look up their work and really highlight it in your own practice. The reason I highlight Eva Marie Garot is because she has this amazing quote about radical indigenism, which she is essentially asking scholars and activists and practitioners to enter tribal relations. And what she means by this is entering tribal relations implies maintaining respect for community values in the search for knowledge. This respect is much more than an attitude. It requires real commitments and real sacrifices on the part of those who practice it. So she's talking about, it's not just talking about that we want to work with tribal communities, but it's actually entering into those relationships with tribal community partners, listening to them, actually going to their communities, sitting on their land, talking with them there, actually going to their own museums and their own repositories. And so this is really at the center of a lot of the work that we do and how we have centered our own work, which is really so important. So one of the first things that we want to highlight and just center here is the context of how many of these archives, particularly related to Native American archives, have often found themselves displaced. And what we mean by that is they're often displaced from their own traditional homelands or where many of these collections have ended up, and maybe at many of your own repositories. The reason why we feel it's so important to highlight this is because this really is what's most important at the center of a lot of the work that we have done, both related to our own collections that we have overseen, but as well as ones that we're trying to give advice about or trying to help others to understand why this work is so important. And so what we want to highlight here is not only how these collections have been displaced historically, but the effects that that's caused in our communities. So the most important thing to remember here is that much of our history, although passed down orally, has also been collected, written down by others. But oftentimes what's not in there is the information about how this has happened or the atrocities and horrible things that have happened in our communities. So one of the things that is so important to highlight here is the different ways that this has happened for our communities is often decenters a lot of the specific trauma that has happened. And formal resolutions have happened for other countries like Canada or Australia through formal truth and reconciliation commissions. But in the United States, there's been nothing like that here. There was a formal apology that was done in 2009 by President Obama, but it was buried in the Defense Appropriations Bill and never really centered in the respectful way that it should have been done. And there's no formal truth and reconciliation commission that's ever been done here in the United States. So this is why we highlight this, that a lot of the work that's been done around bringing awareness about Indigenous archives, that it's really been done through professions such as ours, like archives, historians, anthropologists, who are trying to bring about awareness of these issues. And so you do see, of course, significant work happening, just how we're doing and meeting today, but there's been no real concerted effort at the national and federal level to bring awareness about these atrocities. So despite this lack of formal truth and reconciliation process, our tribal communities have continued to fight for sovereignty, legal rights, and self-determination, and the restoration of tribal status after termination. And in this effort to seek formal federal recognition, tribal communities encounter significant challenges faced with finding and presenting historical records. And so one thing that's often highlighted or that we see are a lot of the legacy of boarding schools in archives or the legacy of that forced assimilation in a lot of our materials. And this legacy, again, is one that isn't often recognized at that federal level, but there's certainly some amazing work going on by the boarding school coalitions that are here in the U.S. And so that is amazing work that is happening. However, much of the work and history that has been gathered has often been done by anthropologists, historians, ethnographers who historically came into our communities thinking we were vanishing as a race and gathering documentation and information about our communities that was then often taken far from our homelands, whether that was to universities, historical societies, other smaller repositories. And so I use this example here of Melville Jacobs because he's very well known in the Pacific Northwest. Here he's working with Annie Peterson, who is also very well known in my community because she spoke Shinnegawa, which is our traditional language. And so while this collection has been at the University of Washington Libraries, her collection is there. It also documents my community, and so that's much farther away for us to go. And then at one point it was actually, because it was collected by Jacobs, at a certain point it was also restricted so that not even tribal community members could see certain parts of it. Luckily that has changed over the years, but so this is just an example of that. So there was this concerted effort to, which is often referred to as salvage collecting, and by doing that, much of our collections were taken to places that were far from our homelands, and there are many more examples of this. Most often these records arrive at these repositories for various reasons, and usually without the knowledge or consent of the community, or maybe weren't sure how these collections were actually going to be used. So due to this complex situation, notable historian William T. Hagen declared in April 1978 that to be an Indian is to have non-Indians control your documents from which other non-Indians write their versions of your history. So we can see this very complex situation in which it's situating Native Americans as this quote archival captive, because so many of our records and our histories were then at these other far off federal repositories or other types of repositories. So he's specifically highlighting the fact that although numerous volumes of records exist, that these records were almost exclusively either gathered or produced by non-Native people who often maybe didn't know what they were interpreting, or again taking it far from their these collecting communities. And so what seemed like a radical idea at the time, he ends with this plea for cooperation and understanding between archivists and tribal communities to ensure that historic tribal records could be accessed, as well as to provide control back to the community. While Hagen gave a strong call to action, especially toward non-natives in archival and the history profession, it would be quite some time before the larger profession saw clear examples of following through with these suggestions. The reason I start with this and want to highlight this is we want to also take you through some of the great activism that has come out of trying to ensure tribal communities have contact back with these collections that have ended up in these repositories. So another key activist that has worked on this is activist and scholar Vine Delory Jr., who also called for the decolonization of Native American archives. In 1978 report, The Right to Know, prepared for White House pre-conference on Indian Library Information Services on or near reservations. And in this paper, he called for the implementation of specific services and practical solutions for Native American archives, cultural heritage, and traditional knowledge held in public repositories. He argued the federal government's treaty responsibility included accountability for tribal communities, educational need to know the past, to know the traditional alternatives advocated by our ancestors, and to know the specific experiences their communities experience, and to know about the world that surrounds them. And so he then calls for specific action in 7 areas by the federal government and tribal communities, including 2 that relate specifically to a lot of the work we're going to be talking about today, which is specifically about, and referring back to that conference I just gave a presentation at, is this right to know what collections are in these repositories. So having collecting repositories, inventorying and cataloging their existing records. So and the basics of what we do, and then also duplicating and making accessible permanent Native American historical records so that they can be made available to tribal communities, and developing information services customized for tribal communities. There are others listed here, but these are some that I like to highlight because I think this is a lot of the work that we are committed to doing and that are so important for tribal communities, so they know what collections are in your repositories and where they have ended up. So he finally kind of concludes in this report saying that the only missing element in fulfilling these promises is the will to act and the intelligence to create wise and substantial programs. So he really calls on information professionals and repositories to do a lot of this work. However, this work from Delory and Hagen called on people to do this work. It would be quite some time before more work began to be done. But there then began to be a lot of work around the development of tribal archive records, repositories, and training. And it's interesting and quite ironic that a lot of this work came about because there was a huge effort, particularly in the late 70s and into the early 80s, that a lot of tribal communities that were terminated in the 1950s and 60s here in the U.S. And then were seeking federal recognition, were required to then find documentation to prove their existence and to prove they had operating tribal governments. The ironic nature of this is that they had to go to these repositories to find these materials to show that they were an actual tribal community in existence, and to prove that they had the legal standing to become recognized as a tribal this time period is then when tribal communities were trying to create their own federal repository or their own repositories, and were working then with other professionals to do that work. So one of these projects was the Native American Archives project funded for the National Endowment for the Humanities, which produced this book, Native American Archives. And this was in the mid-1980s. The book was really an effort by the first effort by the Society of American Archivists to actually assist and help tribal communities with a guidebook on how do you create your own repositories, what does that look like, and this was again more for tribal communities to build their own repositories as they started to gather their records. And other examples of this, particularly in my own region of the United States, is the Southwest Oregon Research Project, which was a more recent effort in the 1990s to gather records from the National Archives and the National Anthropological Archives for records that related to our own history, to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and other anthropologists, and actually photocopy them. This was before digital repatriation, and to actually bring them back to Oregon. And so there was this huge effort to do this work to bring it back, and this collection now resides at the University of Oregon. It's a completely copy-based collection, which we have since digitized, but it's one of the first efforts to really repatriate back to our own community. Again, this is not physical repatriation, this is a digitized effort, but it was an effort to bring back those materials that were clear on the other side of the United States. So this was really important to my community. But then there's been other things and different training and professional developments that have happened since that time as well to ensure tribal communities have the resources so that they could find these materials and also build up their own repositories and collections. But that doesn't solve also the problem of many of our collections still being in federal repositories and in state repositories where we still may not have access to them, and also where there still was historically the challenge of helping more non-native archivists to know how to actually manage our collections. So this brings us to the development of the protocols for Native American archival materials, which I was lucky to be a part of in 2006. This is a group of us that gathered in 2006 at Northern Arizona University because we saw all of this activist work that had, of course, happened around tribal archives, but we still saw this challenge of wanting to ensure that there was guidance for non-native archivists and those working with our collections to, in these non-native repositories, to know how to, care for our collections, how to build up strong, respectful relationships, and how to begin to have these conversations. So the whole idea behind the reason why we drafted the protocols was to help those working with our collections in these repositories to know how to start to have these conversations, but also to provide guidance. And so this group was made up of native, non-native archivists, historians, curators, those in the community. We also got guidance from Australia. We brought in people who had already done this work, already drafted protocols, so that we could get guidance on how to do this. And this was really important because, of course, as you know, there's no formal law or legal standing for this type of work. There is laws around repatriation for objects through NAGPRA, but there was nothing that was guiding and providing protection for Native American archival materials, so things that fell out of NAGPRA, like letters and records and film and anything that may also be touching on or relating to cultural patrimony or sensitivity, but it didn't really have any protection. So the whole goal of drafting the protocols was, again, to build these relationships, to talk about respect and recognition of tribal communities. So by talking about what is sovereignty, why are tribal collections and these different than others, and then how to talk about and how to build a shared stewardship within collections. So this was all about advocating for these values and centering this perspective so that we can begin to have these conversations. And so once that document was developed and put together, these main concepts, there were 10 sections regarding collections, ownership, cultural property, preservation, handling, access, and use of these types of collections. So in it wasn't just giving guidance to those repositories repositories, there's also a section in each area where it's also the responsibility of tribal communities to know what's their side. So it was definitely talking about a balanced relationship that was reciprocal, that was bringing people together and communities together to have these conversations. But of course, because this was introducing although to us this was an inherent way to approach this work, to many and to more traditional archivists who had Western ways of learning how to be an archivist or approach this work, some felt that this was definitely a huge transition for asking them to approach work in a much different way. However, there were people who readily implemented this work, and here are just examples of a few and who we have worked with, and which is why we want to highlight that although there were many challenges within organizations adopting them, there were many at the beginning that did and were already doing this work because it's at the core and center of the work that they do. And we continue to have presentations and put together presentations through the Society of American Archivists to have forums, but we also put together our own forums and summits as well. And one of the most recent ones was in 2015, where we continued to gather and wanted to talk more internationally, not only with the U.S. but Canadian archivists, and revisited major issues and began to include the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and to develop case studies. So the reason why we did this is because this wasn't just something that we drafted and that we wouldn't stop having conversations about, but we wanted to continue to have those conversations and discussions and to bring other people into the conversation. So in 2015, this was the group that gathered to begin to have those continued conversations, and it was so important to us to have those conversations because throughout this, of course, one of the goals, while it was important to have the protocols endorsed by different organizations, that wasn't our only goal. That was certainly one of our goals. But throughout this, and as I mentioned, the Society of American Archivists at first did not endorse the protocols, and that didn't mean we stopped our work. We just continued